Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense Ship Liberty, watching the massive alien vessel approach through the view screen. The ship was 3 times larger than anything humanity had ever built, its dark metal surface covered in strange glowing symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Sir, they're requesting permission to dock," reported Lieutenant Dan Hayes from the communications station. Jake nodded slowly. This was the moment humanity had dreamed about for centuries. First contact with an alien species. But something felt wrong. The alien ship had appeared without warning in Earth's solar system, ignoring all human patrol ships as if they were insects. "Grant permission, Lieutenant, and alert Admiral Carter immediately." The docking process took 2 hours. Jake watched through security cameras as the alien delegation walked through the airlock. They were tall, about 8 feet high, with blue-gray skin and 4 arms. Their leader wore elaborate robes covered in the same glowing symbols as their ship. Jake met them in the main conference room with his senior officers. The alien leader stepped forward and spoke in perfect English, though his voice had a strange metallic sound. "I am High Commander Vextar of the Zeran Empire. We have traveled far to meet your species. Welcome aboard the Liberty. I am Captain Morrison. How did you learn our language?" Vextar made a sound that might have been laughter. "We have been watching your world for some time. Your radio signals, your internet, your primitive data streams. Learning your language was simple." Jake felt his jaw tighten. Primitive? Humanity had built faster-than-light ships, colonized dozens of worlds, and created technology that would have seemed like magic to their ancestors. "We're honored by your visit. What brings you to our system?" The Zeran Empire spans 12 species across 1,000 worlds. We offer your kind a place among us. Vextar gestured with 2 of his arms. "You will become our protected clients. We will defend you from the dangers of space. In return, you will provide us with resources and workers." "That sounds like slavery," said Commander Lisa Barnes, Jake's second-in-command. Vextar's large black eyes fixed on her. "Slavery is an ugly word. We prefer partnership. Your people will be safe under our protection. Many species have found happiness in serving the Empire." Jake studied the alien's face. "And if we refuse?" "That would be unwise." Vextar touched a device on his belt. Suddenly, every screen on the Liberty went dark. The lights flickered. The ship's engines stopped humming. "What did you do?" Jake demanded, but he already knew. The aliens had somehow disabled his ship without even trying. "A simple demonstration," Vextar replied calmly. "Your technology is impressive for such a young species, but it is like comparing a stone axe to our energy weapons. We could have destroyed your ship, but we chose mercy instead." The power came back online a moment later. Jake's communications officer was already checking his systems, his face pale with shock. "Sir," he whispered, "they shut down everything. Our weapons, engines, life support, everything. For exactly 30 seconds. Jake felt cold sweat on his forehead. If the aliens could do this to their most advanced warship, what hope did humanity have? Admiral Lisa Carter arrived 3 hours later on the battleship Independence. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp blue eyes that had seen too many battles. Jake briefed her quickly before they met with the aliens again. "Commander Vextar," she said formally, "I speak for Earth's government. Your offer is interesting, but we need time to consider it." "Of course, but do not take too long. The galaxy is dangerous for unprotected species. Pirates, raiders, cosmic disasters, so many things can destroy a world." Vexatar's tone was friendly, but Jake heard the threat underneath. Admiral Carter nodded. "We understand. How long do we have?" One of your months should be sufficient. We will establish a temporary base on your moon to await your answer. After the aliens left, Jake found himself alone with Admiral Carter in his ready room. "What do you think?" he asked. Carter stared out the window at the stars. "I think we're in trouble. Did you see how easily they disabled our ship? 30 seconds of complete control. They could have vented our atmosphere, sent us into the sun, anything. And they want us to be grateful for their mercy." Carter turned back to him. "Run a full analysis of everything that happened. I want to know exactly how they did it. And Jake, keep this quiet. If word gets out about how helpless we were, it could cause panic." Jake nodded. "Do you think we have a choice?" "There's always a choice. The question is whether we're willing to pay the price for it." Over the next week, Jake worked with his engineers to understand what the aliens had done. The answer was disturbing. They had somehow sent signals through humanity's own computer networks, taking control of every system simultaneously. It was technology far beyond human understanding. The alien base on the moon grew larger each day. More ships arrived, all of them massive and threatening. Earth's media called it a historic moment, the beginning of a new age for humanity. Most people were excited about joining a galactic civilization, but Jake had seen Vextar's eyes when he talked about other species serving the Empire. There had been no warmth there, no respect. Only the cold calculation of a master evaluating new slaves. He sent his report to Admiral Carter with a personal message. "They don't see us as equals. We're just another species to be conquered." Her reply came back quickly. "Agreed. Begin contingency planning immediately. And Jake, prepare for the worst." As Jake looked out at the growing alien fleet around the moon, he wondered if humanity was about to make the biggest mistake in its history. The aliens offered protection and technology, but at what cost? The month passed quickly. Too quickly. Soon, humanity would have to give its answer. Jake hoped they would choose freedom over safety, even if it meant facing the terrible power of the Xeran Empire alone. But deep in his heart, he feared they would choose the easy path. And once they did, there might be no way back. Dr. Alex Rodriguez stepped off the transport ship onto the mining platform orbiting Kepler 442b. The human colony of New Haven stretched below him on the planet's surface, but something was wrong. Where he remembered green fields and bustling cities, he now saw massive strip mines and gray factory complexes. "Welcome to the New Haven Resource Extraction Zone," said the Xeran overseer, a tall alien with the same blue-gray skin as Vextar. "I am Sub-Commander Krell. You are here to study the local wildlife, yes?" Alex nodded, though that wasn't the real reason for his visit. As Earth's lead xenobiologist, he had been sent to investigate reports of missing colonists. Officially, he was conducting a routine biological survey. "The mining operations have expanded quickly," Alex observed, watching huge machines tear chunks from the planet's surface. "Efficiency is important. Your people produce valuable minerals for the Empire. Everyone benefits." Alex spent the first week cataloging native species, but his real work began after dark. He used his security clearance to access colony records and found disturbing patterns. Over the past 3 months since the Alliance began, nearly 40,000 colonists had been relocated from their farms and homes to work in the new mines. The official reports said they had volunteered for better-paying jobs, but when Alex tried to visit the mining camps, Xeran guards turned him away. "Restricted area," they said, "for worker safety." On his 7th night, Alex was studying soil samples when he heard a soft knock on his laboratory door. A thin, human woman slipped inside, looking terrified. Dr. Rodriguez? I'm Mary Chen. I used to live in Greendale Valley before they moved us to the camps. Alex set down his instruments. What happened to your valley? They said we had to relocate for a new mining project. Promised us good jobs and better housing. Mary's hands shook as she spoke. But the camps aren't what they promised. We work 18-hour shifts with barely any food. And some people disappear. Disappear? They take them for medical examinations. We never see them again. Mary pulled up her sleeve, showing a strange mark on her arm. They inject us with something every week. Say it's vitamins, but people get sick afterward. Alex felt ice in his stomach. How many people have disappeared? In my camp alone, maybe 200. There are 12 camps total. After Mary left, Alex couldn't sleep. He spent the rest of the night analyzing the mark on his scanner. The results made him physically ill. It wasn't a vitamin injection. It was some kind of tracking device mixed with unknown chemical compounds. The next morning, he sent an encrypted message to Admiral Carter on Earth. Need immediate extraction. Have found evidence of human experimentation. Meanwhile, 3 systems away, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Brooks was investigating the destruction of Research Station Delta 7. The official Xeran report claimed the station had been destroyed by terrorist elements planning attacks on Empire facilities. Ryan knew better. Delta 7 had been humanity's most secret research facility, working on new defensive technologies that might have evened the odds against Xeran ships. Only a handful of people even knew it existed. He floated through the wreckage in his spacesuit, recording everything. The station hadn't been destroyed by human weapons. The blast patterns were clearly from Xeran energy cannons. But why would they attack a research station? His answer came when he found the remains of the main computer, core. Someone had tried to download all the research data before destroying the station. The download had been interrupted, but Ryan recovered fragments of what they had been after. Project Equalizer. Humanity's attempt to develop weapons that could penetrate Xeran shields. Ryan transmitted his findings to Admiral Carter with a grim message. They're not just watching us. They're actively preventing us from developing better defenses. On Earth, President Helen Davis sat in an emergency session with her military advisors. Admiral Carter had just finished briefing them on the reports from Alex and Ryan. So they're experimenting on our people and destroying our research facilities, President Davis said quietly. What else? Food shipments from our agricultural worlds have increased by 300%, reported General Paul Kim. They claim it's to feed their growing fleet, but intelligence suggests they're stockpiling supplies on their home worlds. And mineral extraction has increased by 500%. Added Secretary of Resources Janet Walsh. At this rate, we'll strip our colonies bare within 5 years. Admiral Carter leaned forward. Madam President, this isn't an alliance. It's systematic exploitation. They're treating us exactly like they would any conquered species. President Davis stared at the report spread across the table. Public opinion polls showed that 70% of humanity still supported the alliance. The Xerans had been careful to make their control seem beneficial. They provided advanced medical technology to Earth's hospitals, impressive entertainment systems, and promises of protection from cosmic threats. But the cost was becoming clear to those who looked closely. What are our options? The president asked. Limited, Admiral Carter admitted. Their technology is still far superior to ours. A direct confrontation would be suicide. Then we build up our capabilities in secret, President Davis decided. Officially, we maintain the alliance and cooperate fully. Unofficially, we prepare for the day we can break free. That could take years, General Kim warned. Then we'd better start now. The next morning, President Davis held a press conference praising the alliance and announcing expanded cooperation with Xeran resource extraction programs. Behind the scenes, she authorized Operation Freedom, humanity's secret preparation for independence. Admiral Carter began moving loyal officers into key positions throughout the fleet. Scientists like Dr. Rodriguez were quietly reassigned to classified projects, and in hidden facilities throughout human space, work began on weapons and technologies that might someday level the playing field. But time was running short. Reports came in weekly of more colonies being strip-mined, more humans disappearing into Xeran medical research programs, and more destruction of human defensive capabilities. The Xerans had offered humanity protection and partnership. Instead, they had delivered chains made of silk and gold, but chains nonetheless. And like every conqueror in history, they had made a crucial mistake. They assumed their victims would remain victims forever. Alex Rodriguez returned to Earth with tissue samples and medical data that would horrify any human who saw them. Ryan Brooks brought evidence of systematic sabotage of human defenses. And across human space, a growing network of resistance began to form. The Xerans thought they understood power, the power of superior technology and overwhelming force. But they were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength had never been its machines or weapons. It was what happened when you pushed human beings too far. Colonel Matt Johnson floated in the cargo bay of the abandoned mining station, watching his engineers install the last of the hidden communication equipment. The station had been listed as destroyed in Xeran records for 2 months, which made it perfect for their purposes. "Quantum transmitter is online, sir," reported Dr. Sophie Wells, the young engineer who had become his most trusted technical advisor. "We're now connected to resistance cells on 17 worlds." Matt nodded grimly. Building the resistance had taken 6 months of careful planning. Every member had been personally vetted by Admiral Carter's intelligence network. They were Marines, scientists, engineers, and colonists who had seen too much of Xeran protection to believe in it anymore. "What's our current strength?" Matt asked. Sophie consulted her datapad. 3,000 active members across human space, another 10,000 sympathizers who provide intelligence and supplies. We have weapons caches on 12 worlds and 4 hidden shipyards working on stealth vessels. The resistance had started with Dr. Alex Rodriguez's horrifying medical reports. When Admiral Carter had quietly shared the evidence of human experimentation with selected military officers, the reaction had been swift and angry. Within weeks, they had begun recruiting people who had family members in the relocation camps, or who had witnessed Xeran brutality firsthand. "Any word from the research teams?" Matt asked. "Dr. Peterson's group finished analyzing captured Xeran technology last week. He thinks he's found a weakness in their shield generators. And the historical research team has something interesting." Sophie brought up a holographic display showing a galactic map. Red dots marked the locations of 847 different star systems. "This is every species the Xeran Empire has conquered in the past 1,000 years, she explained. Dr. Sarah Kim's team spent months piecing together the pattern from captured Xeran databases. Matt studied the map. "That's a lot of dead civilizations." "Actually, most of them aren't dead. They're still alive but completely enslaved. The Xerans follow the same pattern every time." Sophie highlighted several systems. First contact, demonstration of superior force, then gradual enslavement over 2 or 3 generations. What happened to the species that resisted? Most didn't. The ones that did fight used conventional military tactics, big fleets, direct confrontation, they all lost within months. Sophie paused. But Matt, we found something important. In 1,000 years of conquest, the Zerans have never faced sustained guerrilla warfare. Matt raised an eyebrow. Never? Their psychology is based on hierarchy and order. They can't understand or adapt to chaotic, unconventional tactics. Every species they've conquered either submitted immediately or fought like we would have 6 months ago, with honor, following rules, trying to win fair fights. And we're not going to fight fair. Exactly. We're going to fight like humans. Over the next 2 hours, Matt reviewed reports from resistance cells across human space. The picture they painted was grim, but not hopeless. On New Geneva, Captain Bill Foster had assembled a team of former Special Forces operators. They were training colonists in sabotage techniques and establishing supply routes through asteroid fields where Zeran sensors couldn't track them. On Armstrong Colony, Dr. Lucy White had discovered that Zeran computer systems were vulnerable to certain types of electromagnetic pulses. Her team was building devices that could disable Zeran equipment without being detected. Most importantly, the Resistance was learning. Every Zeran patrol they observed, every piece of technology they captured, every conversation they overheard, was being analyzed and shared throughout the network. They think they're dealing with another primitive species, Matt told his senior staff during their weekly meeting. They see our official compliance and assume we're beaten. They don't understand that humans can smile and cooperate while planning their destruction. Commander Amy Foster, Bill's daughter and one of their best pilots, leaned forward. What about weapons? Their personal shields can stop anything we currently have. Dr. Wells smiled. We're working on that. Turnout Zeran shields are designed to stop energy weapons and high-velocity projectiles, but they're not very good against chemical explosives or biological agents. Biological agents? Matt frowned. Nothing deadly to humans, but we've found bacteria that eat the specific metals used in Zeran equipment. Introduce it into their ventilation systems, and their technology starts falling apart. The Resistance had also been studying Zeran society through careful observation of their behavior. The aliens were rigidly hierarchical, with each individual knowing exactly their place in the command structure. They rarely showed initiative and always waited for orders from superiors. They're strong when everything goes according to plan, observed Dr. Kim during one strategy session. But they panic when faced with unexpected situations. Their whole society is built on predictability. Matt filed that information away. Unpredictability might be humanity's greatest weapon. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later when Resistance members on Titan Base managed to capture a Zeran communication device. Dr. Wells spent days analyzing it before making an incredible discovery. Matt, you need to see this, she said, excitement in her voice. I've been monitoring Zeran communications for the past month. They have over 3 million troops stationed throughout human space, but guess how many they usually need to control a conquered species? How many? Less than 50,000. They're using 60 times more troops to control us than they've ever needed before. Matt felt a surge of pride. We're making them nervous. More than nervous. I intercepted a message from High Commander Vextar to his superiors. He's requesting additional forces because of unusual resistance patterns among humans. The Resistance had been careful to avoid major operations that might provoke massive retaliation. Instead, they focused on thousands of small actions. Supply convoys that disappeared, communication relays that malfunctioned, mining equipment that broke down mysteriously, and Zeran personnel who got sick from contaminated food. None of it was enough to threaten Zeran control, but all of it together was forcing them to commit enormous resources to maintaining order. "How long before they realize what we're doing?" Matt asked. "They already know there's organized resistance, but they don't understand the scope. They think we're a few hundred terrorists, not a growing army." Sophie paused. "Of course, that could change quickly if we're not careful." Matt nodded. They were walking a tightrope, trying to build strength while avoiding detection. But every day brought new recruits and new intelligence about Zarin weaknesses. The Resistance had also made contact with other enslaved species throughout the Empire. Most were too broken to fight, but a few were interested in the human approach to warfare. They were sharing intelligence and beginning to coordinate actions across multiple star systems. "The Zarins have conquered nearly 1,000 species," Matt told his staff during their final planning meeting. "But they've never faced a species that treats war as an art form instead of a formal ritual. They're about to learn why humans spent most of their history fighting each other." As the meeting ended, Matt looked out at the stars through the station's observation deck. Somewhere out there, 3 million Zarin troops were occupying human worlds, confident in their technological superiority and military power. They had no idea that they were surrounded by an enemy that had been preparing for this moment for thousands of years. An enemy that had learned warfare not from conquering helpless primitives, but from fighting other humans, the most dangerous predators the galaxy had ever produced. The Zarins understood power, but they were about to discover something far more dangerous than power. They were about to face human fury, carefully planned and perfectly focused. Admiral Kethmore stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring down at the human colony of New Boston. The planet was beautiful, with blue oceans and green continents that reminded him of some of the better worlds in the Empire. It was also causing him enormous problems. For 3 months, the New Boston colonists had been falling behind on their mineral quotas. Their mining operations were constantly experiencing equipment failures, worker strikes, and mysterious accidents. Just last week, an entire convoy of rare Earth elements had vanished between the mines and the spaceport. Kethmore had dealt with rebellious species before, but humans were proving unusually difficult. Unlike other conquered peoples, they didn't seem properly intimidated by displays of force. Instead, they smiled politely and found new ways to cause problems. "Sub-Commander Yartel," he called to his aide, "what is the current shortfall in mineral production?" 47% below target, Admiral. The humans claim equipment malfunctions and supply problems, but our engineers find nothing wrong with their machinery. Kethmore's 4 hands clenched into fists. The High Command was asking questions about his sector's performance. Other conquered worlds were meeting their quotas easily, so why were humans so difficult? Perhaps they need a reminder of the consequences of defying the Empire, he said finally. Colonel Matt Johnson was inspecting a weapons cache hidden in an abandoned subway tunnel when the emergency signal reached him. Dr. Sophie Wells's voice crackled through his communicator, tight with fear. "Matt, you need to get to a secure channel immediately. Something terrible is happening at New Boston." Matt made his way to the nearest Resistance safe house, where a quantum transmitter allowed secure communication across human space. What he saw on the screen made his blood turn to ice. Zaran warships were taking positions in orbit around New Boston, 20 massive vessels, their weapons trained on the planet's major cities. They're demanding immediate compliance with mineral quotas, Sophie reported from her hidden base. Admiral Kethmore has given the colonial government 1 hour to surrender the resistance members responsible for the production delays. "How many people are down there?" Matt asked, though he already knew the answer. 2.3 million civilians, including about 50 resistance members. Matt felt sick. The resistance had been careful to keep their activities on New Boston small and subtle. A few sabotaged machines, some delayed shipments, nothing that should have provoked this kind of response. But he had underestimated Xeran arrogance. They couldn't accept that humans might resist their rule, so any problems had to be the result of organized terrorism. "Can we contact Governor Williams?" Matt asked. "We're trying, but Xeran forces have surrounded the government complex. They're demanding he hand over a list of resistance members." Matt closed his eyes. There was no list to hand over. The resistance was too careful for that. But the Xerans wouldn't believe that. They expected conquered species to have clear hierarchies that could be arrested and executed. On New Boston, Governor Robert Williams stood in his office, watching Xeran troops march through the streets outside. His aide, a young woman named Janet Ross, was trying to maintain contact with the orbital fleet. "Admiral Kethmore is refusing all negotiations," she reported. "He says we have 30 minutes to produce the resistance leaders or face consequences." Williams had been a resistance sympathizer since the early days, though he had never been an active member. He knew there were no resistance leaders to surrender. The humans causing problems were ordinary citizens acting on their own initiative. "Get me a planetary broadcast channel," he ordered. "Sir, the Xerans have jammed most communications. Then get me whatever you can." 10 minutes later, Williams addressed his people through emergency radio frequencies. His voice was calm, but those who knew him could hear the fear underneath. "Citizens of New Boston, we are facing an ultimatum from the Xeran fleet. They demand we surrender people who don't exist and confess to crimes we haven't committed. I want you to know that your government will not abandon you to alien threats." The broadcast lasted only 3 minutes before Xeran jamming cut it off. But it was enough. Across the planet, people understood that their governor had chosen defiance over submission. Admiral Kethmore received the message with cold anger. In his experience, conquered species eventually produced scapegoats to save themselves. The fact that humans refused to do so only proved their inherent dishonesty. "Admiral," reported his weapons officer, "the planetary government has ceased all communications. Should we extend the deadline?" Kethmore thought about the reports he would have to send to High Command if New Boston's rebellion spread to other human worlds. The Empire had a reputation to maintain. Other species watched to see how defiance was punished. "No. Open fire on the capital city. Target government and industrial centers." The bombardment began exactly 1 hour after the ultimatum expired. Energy beams lanced down from orbit, turning buildings to vapor and streets to glass. The planetary defense grid, what little existed, was destroyed in the first 5 minutes. But Kethmore had made a fatal error. Instead of targeting military installations or resistance hideouts, he was destroying civilian targets, schools, hospitals, residential neighborhoods, anywhere that might harbor resistance sympathizers. Matt Johnson watched the bombardment through satellite feeds, his face growing harder with each explosion. Beside him, Dr. Wells was recording everything, transmitting the images throughout human space. "They're not targeting military sites," she said, her voice hollow with shock. "They're murdering civilians." The bombardment continued for 6 hours. When it finally stopped, New Boston's major cities were burning ruins. The death toll would take weeks to calculate, but early estimates suggested over 2 million casualties. Among the dead were Colonel Johnson's wife Sarah and their 8-year-old daughter Emma, who had been visiting Sarah's sister in New Boston. Captain Amy Foster lost her parents, who had retired to the peaceful colony world 5 years earlier. The images of the destruction spread through human space like wildfire. The Zarin Empire had showed its true face at last, not protectors or allies, but conquerors who would murder entire populations to maintain control. President Helen Davis appeared on global television 8 hours after the bombardment ended. She was pale but composed, her voice steady as she addressed not just humanity, but the galaxy itself. The Zarin Empire has today revealed its true nature through the cowardly murder of millions of innocent civilians on New Boston. As of this moment, Earth formally withdraws from all agreements with the Zarin Empire and declares them an enemy of humanity. The declaration was broadcast on every frequency, transmitted to every human world, and sent directly to High Commander Vextar on his flagship. "We tried peace," Davis continued. "We tried cooperation. You chose to teach us war. Now you will learn that humans are very good students." Across human space, the response was immediate and total. Every resistance cell activated simultaneously. Supply depots exploded, communication relays went dark, and Zarin personnel found themselves under attack on dozens of worlds. But more than that, something fundamental had changed in human psychology. The careful restraint that had characterized the resistance movement vanished overnight. Admiral Carter's secret preparations shifted into high gear, and weapons that had been held back were suddenly deployed. High Commander Vextar received reports of human attacks across his entire sector. In 12 hours, his forces had lost more equipment and personnel than in the previous year combined. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his staff. "They were cooperative yesterday. Today they fight like demons." What Vextar didn't understand was that he had crossed a line that humans recognized instinctively, but Zarins couldn't comprehend. There was a difference between military action and mass murder, between conquest and genocide. The Zarins had conquered hundreds of species using the same tactics that had worked at New Boston. Show overwhelming force, destroy a few cities, and the survivors would submit. But humans were different. Humans had spent millennia fighting each other, and they knew the difference between soldiers and civilians. They understood concepts like war crimes and rules of engagement. More importantly, they knew that an enemy who would murder millions of innocents would never stop until humanity was completely enslaved or extinct. Colonel Matt Johnson stood in the ruins of what had been a children's hospital on New Boston, his face expressionless as he recorded a message for the Resistance Network. "They want to know what human fury looks like," he said quietly. "They're about to find out." The Zarins had taught humanity an important lesson at New Boston. They had shown that this was not a conflict between civilizations or a struggle for territory. This was a war of extermination, and humans had been preparing for that kind of war their entire history. Captain Amy Foster checked her instruments one final time as her stealth ship approached the Zarin supply depot at Proxima Station. The vessel, designed by Dr. Sophie Wells's team, was invisible to Zarin sensors and armed with weapons that the Empire had never encountered before. "Ghost Squadron, this is Ghost Leader," she whispered into her communicator. "Target is in sight. Remember, no survivors." Behind her, 11 other stealth ships moved through space like hunting sharks. Their pilots were all veterans who had lost family at New Boston. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were instruments of revenge. The attack began at exactly midnight, station time. Amy's ship fired first, launching a cluster of devices that attached themselves to the station's hull. Within seconds, the devices released a cloud of nanites that began eating through the station's armor. "What was that?" Amy heard a Xeran voice over the intercepted communications. "Weapons Control, report!" But there was no response from Weapons Control, because Ghost 2 had already destroyed their main defense systems with a focused electromagnetic pulse. The Xerans were firing blindly now, their sensors unable to track the human ships. Amy watched the station's hull begin to collapse as the nanites did their work. Inside, Xeran personnel were dying as their life support systems failed. The few who made it to escape pods found them disabled by human viruses that had been uploaded to the station's computer network days earlier. "Ghost Leader, this is Ghost 7, reported Lieutenant Jack Murphy. "Convoy approaching from the asteroid belt." Amy smiled coldly. The convoy was carrying food supplies for 3 Xeran fleet bases. Without it, they would have to abandon their positions or starve. All units, new targets incoming, switch to Plan Delta. The convoy never had a chance. The Xeran ships were heavily armed but designed for fighting conventional enemies. They couldn't respond to attacks that came from seemingly empty space, using weapons that ignored their shields and armor. In 15 minutes, Amy's squadron destroyed a supply depot that could support 50,000 Xeran troops and a convoy carrying enough food for 6 months of operations. The human losses were 0. As they headed back to their hidden base, Amy transmitted her report to Admiral Carter. Ghost. Squadron successful. No human casualties. Xeran casualties estimated at 12,000. 3 systems away, Colonel Matt Johnson was leading a ground assault on the Xeran Administrative Center on Kepler 438b. His team moved through the building like shadows, using weapons that fired chemically tipped projectiles instead of energy beams. The Xerans had expected human attacks to follow conventional patterns, uniformed soldiers fighting according to rules of war. Instead, they faced humans dressed as maintenance workers and medical personnel, who smiled politely before injecting them with compounds that dissolved their nervous systems. "Sir, we've reached the main computer core," reported Sergeant Kate Wilson over the secure channel. "Upload the virus and set the charges," Matt replied, stepping over the body of a Xeran officer who had died trying to call for help. The virus Dr. Wells had designed was particularly nasty. It would spread through the Xeran computer network, causing navigation systems to malfunction, weapons to fire on friendly targets, and life support systems to shut down randomly. But the real purpose of the raid was the intelligence they were gathering. Matt's team was downloading every file in the Xeran database, looking for information about other enslaved species and the locations of key Empire facilities. "Upload complete," Wilson reported. "Explosives are set." Matt looked around the facility. One last time. 3 months ago, this building had been the center of Xeran control over human space. Tonight it would be a crater. All teams, withdraw to extraction point. They were gone before the building exploded, taking with it the records of 800 enslaved worlds and the personal files of every Xeran officer in the sector. Admiral Lisa Carter stood in the war room deep beneath Earth's surface, watching. Reports flow in from across human space. In the 72 hours since President Davis had declared war, human forces had launched over 400 separate attacks. "Status report," she ordered. General Paul Kim consulted his displays. "Xeran. Casualties are approaching 100,000. We've destroyed 37 supply depots, 15 communication relays, and 6 fleet bases. Human losses are minimal." "What about their response?" "That's the interesting part. They're not responding effectively. Their fleets are moving to defend major installations, but they can't find our bases or predict where we'll strike next." Carter nodded grimly. The Xerans were trying to fight a conventional war against an enemy that refused to follow conventional rules. Their massive fleets were impressive, but useless against human teams that struck from hidden positions and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Dr. Wells's virus has infected approximately 60% of their computer networks. General, Kim continued. They're experiencing system failures throughout their occupied territories. And the biological weapons? Dr. Rodriguez's bacteria are spreading through their ventilation systems on 12 worlds. Their equipment is literally rotting away. Carter allowed herself a small smile. The Xerans had superior technology, but they had never faced an enemy that used biological warfare. Their ships and bases were sterile environments perfect for human-designed bacteria that consumed metal and plastic. The most effective attacks weren't even military in nature. Human infiltrators had contaminated Xeran food supplies with drugs that caused hallucinations and paranoia. Xeran officers were shooting each other, convinced that their subordinates were human spies. What about civilian casualties? Carter asked. Minimal, on our side. The Xerans have been so focused on military targets that they haven't had time for reprisals against human colonies. That had been a key part of Carter's strategy. Keep the Xerans so busy defending themselves that they couldn't launch punitive strikes against civilian targets. It was working, but she knew it wouldn't last forever. On the bridge of his flagship, High Commander Vexatar struggled to understand what was happening to his forces. In 3 days, he had lost more ships and personnel than in the previous decade. Combined, Subcommander Krell, he called to his aide, explain to me how a primitive species is destroying installations that have never been successfully attacked. Krell consulted his reports nervously. Sir, the humans are not fighting according to recognized patterns. They attack civilian facilities, use biological weapons, and target non-combatant personnel. You mean they're fighting dishonorably? Yes, sir. They ignore all accepted rules of warfare. Vexatar had studied the military histories of hundreds of species. All of them fought according to similar principles. Formal declarations of war, uniformed armies, protection of civilians, respect for surrender. It was how civilized beings conducted conflict. But humans weren't following any of those rules. They struck without warning, targeted civilian infrastructure, and showed no mercy to prisoners. It was chaos, not warfare. Have you identified their command structure? Vexatar asked. No, sir. They appear to operate in independent cells with no central coordination. That was impossible. No military force could function without clear hierarchy and central command. Yet somehow humans were coordinating attacks across dozens of star systems without any detectable communication between their forces. What Vexatar didn't understand was that humans had been preparing for this war for months. Every attack had been planned in advance, with predetermined targets and timing. The resistance cells didn't need to communicate because they already knew what to do. Sir, reported his communications officer, we're receiving a transmission from the human Admiral Carter. Put it through. Carter's image appeared on the main screen. She looked calm and professional, like an officer conducting routine business. High Commander Vexatar, this is Admiral Carter of the Earth Defense Forces. I'm calling to discuss terms. Terms? Vexatar was confused. You are the ones losing this conflict. Are we? In the last 3 days, you've lost over 40 installations and 100,000 personnel. We've lost fewer than 200. Those don't seem like the numbers of a losing side. Vexatar felt his confidence waver. The humans were right about the casualty figures, though he couldn't understand how they were achieving such results. What do you want? He asked finally. Complete withdrawal of all Xeran forces from human space within 1 month. In return, we will cease attacks on your installations and personnel. Impossible. The Empire does not negotiate with terrorists. Carter's expression didn't change. Very well. In that case, you should know that this has been the easy phase of our war. We've been attacking your outlying facilities and supply lines. Tomorrow, we begin targeting your main fleet bases and command centers. The transmission ended, leaving Vexatar staring at a blank screen. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders that he couldn't give. The humans had declared war on the most powerful empire in galactic history. And somehow, impossibly, they were winning. Vextar had spent his career conquering primitive species, who fought with honor and lost with dignity. He had never faced an enemy that treated war as a science instead of a ritual. He was about to learn why humans had spent most of their history fighting each other, and why that made them the most dangerous warriors the galaxy had ever seen. Commander Tony Blake crouched in the ventilation shaft of Zirin Command Station Alpha 7, listening to the alien voices below. The station was supposed to be impregnable, protected by the most advanced shields and weapons in the Empire. But the Zerans had never considered the possibility of an enemy small enough to crawl through their air ducts. The humans have destroyed another supply convoy in Sector 12. One voice said in the guttural Zeran language that Tony had learned during months of preparation. That makes 18 convoys lost this week, another replied. How are they finding our shipping routes? Tony smiled grimly as he planted the listening device Dr. Wells had designed. The Zerans still didn't understand that humans had been intercepting their communications for months, learning their patrol schedules and supply routes. He crawled further into the shaft, heading toward the main computer core. His mission was to upload a virus that would turn their own defensive systems against them, but he was also gathering intelligence that would shake the foundations of the Zeran Empire. 20 minutes later, Tony reached his target. The computer core was a massive crystalline structure that pulsed with energy. He attached Dr. Wells's quantum infiltrator to the main data conduit and began the upload. As the virus worked its way through the Zeran network, Tony accessed their strategic databases. What he found there made him catch his breath. The Zeran Empire was fracturing. On 17 different worlds, enslaved species had risen in rebellion after hearing about human resistance. The Corvani, who had been conquered 3 centuries ago, had destroyed their planetary tribute centers. The Veltar had poisoned their overseers and seized control of 3 star systems. Even the ancient Zephyrians, enslaved for over 500 years, were attacking Zeran installations. But most shocking of all was what was happening within Zeran society itself. Tony downloaded files showing massive disagreements among the Empire's leadership. Some wanted to negotiate with the humans, others demanded total extermination, and a few were questioning whether the Empire's expansion had gone too far. Upload complete, he whispered into his communicator. Beginning extraction. As Tony made his way back through the ventilation system, alarms began sounding throughout the station. But they weren't responding to his infiltration. The virus was already at work, causing their sensors to report phantom attacks and their defensive weapons to target empty space. By the time he reached his extraction point, the station's crew was in chaos, firing at shadows, while their own systems turned against them. 3 systems away, Dr. Karen Price was putting the finishing touches on her masterpiece. The computer virus she had designed over the past 6 months was far more sophisticated than anything the Zerans could have imagined. It's not just a virus, she explained to Admiral Carter over the secure channel. It's a complete takeover protocol. Once it spreads through their network, it will make their ships attack each other. Carter leaned forward. How widespread is the infection? 78% of their military network is compromised. The virus learns their command codes and defense protocols, then uses them against other ships. The demonstration came that afternoon when a Zarin fleet patrol near Jupiter suddenly opened fire on itself. The lead ship's targeting computer, infected with Karen's virus, identified the other vessels as human infiltrators and launched a full attack. The battle lasted 6 hours and ended with all 12 Zarin ships destroyed by their own weapons. The human observers recorded everything, then transmitted the footage throughout the galaxy. On the Zarin homeworld, High Commander Vex-Tar stood before the Empire's ruling council, trying to explain how a primitive species had brought their civilization to the brink of collapse. "The humans fight without honor," he said, his 4 arms gesturing helplessly. "They attack civilians, use biological weapons, and turn our own technology against us." Council leader Zarthek, eldest of the Zarin race, studied the reports with growing alarm. "In 1 month, they have destroyed more of our infrastructure than we lost in the previous century. How is this possible?" "They don't follow conventional warfare principles," Vex-Tar replied. "Every military doctrine we've developed assumes an enemy that fights according to established rules. And humans don't? No, my lord. They treat war as a creative exercise. They invent new tactics constantly, adapt to our responses, and attack in ways we never considered possible." Around the council chamber, other Zarin leaders reviewed the devastating reports. 18 rebellions across the Empire, supply lines in chaos, computer networks compromised, and fleets destroying themselves. "What of our allies?" asked Council Member Vellani. "Surely the other founding species of the Empire will assist us?" Vex-Tar's expression grew even more grim. "3 of our founding members have requested permission to negotiate separate peace treaties with the humans. The Korthan claim they never agreed to this level of conflict. The Yilani are withdrawing their fleets to defend their home systems." "Cowards," Zarthek spat. "We gave them prosperity and protection for centuries. With respect, my lord, they prospered because they were part of a winning empire. Now they fear they've joined a losing one." The council fell silent. For 1,000 years, the Zarin Empire had seemed unstoppable. They had superior technology, overwhelming numbers, and the confidence that came from never losing a war. But humans had shattered that confidence in just 1 month. "What do our military analysts predict?" Zarthek asked finally. "Complete collapse within 6 months if current trends continue," Vex-Tar admitted. "The humans are targeting our logistics and communication networks. Our forces can't coordinate effectively, and our subject species see weakness for the first time in centuries." Council member Korthval leaned forward. "Perhaps we should consider negotiation, cut our losses, and withdraw from human space." "Impossible," Zarthek replied firmly. "If we show weakness to humans, every species in the Empire will think they can rebel. We must find a way to defeat them decisively." But privately, Zarthek was beginning to understand the magnitude of their miscalculation. The Zarins had conquered hundreds of species, but all of them had been predictable. They followed social hierarchies, military traditions, and cultural rules that made them easy to understand and control. Humans were different. They seemed to have no fixed culture, no permanent hierarchy, and no rules they wouldn't break to achieve victory. It was like fighting a force of nature instead of a civilization. On Earth, Colonel Matt Johnson received Tony Blake's intelligence reports with satisfaction. The Zarin Empire wasn't just losing militarily, it was falling apart politically. "We need to accelerate the timeline," he told Admiral Carter during their strategy meeting. "If we can push them just a little harder, the whole structure might collapse." Carter nodded. "What do you recommend?" "Strike at their core worlds. Show the enslaved species that the Zerans can't even protect themselves, let alone their subjects." "That's incredibly risky. Their home system defenses are the strongest in the Empire." Matt's expression was cold. "They murdered 2 million civilians at New Boston. Risk is acceptable." The next phase of human operations targeted installations that had never been attacked in Zeran history. Space elevators on their industrial worlds were severed, causing massive economic disruption. Their main communication hub was infiltrated and destroyed, cutting off contact between distant fleets. Even their cultural centers and universities were attacked, showing that nowhere in the Empire was safe from human reach. But the most effective attack wasn't military at all. Dr. Price had developed a new virus that infected Zeran entertainment and news networks, broadcasting footage of human victories and Zeran defeats throughout the Empire. For the first time in centuries, enslaved species saw their masters lose battles. They watched Zeran fleets destroy themselves, saw human teams walk through supposedly impregnable facilities, and heard their overseers panic and contradict each other. The psychological impact was devastating. Rebellions that had simmered for centuries erupted into open warfare. Supply chains collapsed as workers refused to cooperate with Zeran authorities. And most importantly, the myth of Zeran invincibility was shattered forever. High Commander Vextar received the final reports in his command bunker. Surrounded by the few officers who hadn't fled or joined the growing calls for his removal. "Sir," his aide reported quietly, 43 worlds are now in open rebellion. Our food production has fallen by 60% and mineral extraction is down 80%. And the humans? Still attacking. Their latest target was the Naval Academy on Zeran Prime itself." Vextar closed his eyes. The Naval Academy was in the heart of their home system, protected by more firepower than most species possessed in their entire fleets. The fact that humans had reached it meant nowhere was safe. "Prepare a message to Admiral Carter," he said finally. "Sir?" "Tell her we're ready to discuss terms." The aide looked shocked. "My lord, the Council has forbidden any communication with the humans." Vextar looked at the tactical displays showing the collapse of everything he had spent his life building. "The Council doesn't understand what we're facing, but I do." He had spent a month learning about human warfare, and the lesson was terrifying. Humans didn't just fight to win, they fought to ensure their enemies could never threaten them again. Admiral Lisa Carter stood on the bridge of the flagship Vengeance, watching the massive human fleet assemble around Earth. 6 months ago, this armada would have been impossible. Humanity barely had enough ships to patrol their own space. Now, they commanded a force that included vessels from 17 different species, all united by their hatred of Zeran oppression. "Final count, Admiral," reported Captain Amy Foster from her position at the tactical station. 247 human ships, 83 Allied vessels from liberated worlds, and 15 captured Zeran ships now under our control. Carter nodded grimly. Operation Retribution had taken 3 months to plan and represented humanity's full commitment to ending the Zeran Empire forever. There would be no halfway measures, no negotiated settlements. After New Boston, the only acceptable outcome was total victory. "Colonel Johnson, report on ground forces." Matt Johnson's voice came through the communications system from the troop. "Transport Liberty's Dream. 50,000 human Marines ready for deployment, plus 30,000 volunteers from liberated species. We have enough firepower to take any planet in the Empire." "Dr. Wells, What's the status of our special weapons? Sophie Wells checked her readings from the science vessel Pioneer. Planet crackers are loaded and operational. Nanite swarms are ready for deployment, and the quantum bombs are armed and waiting. Carter felt a momentary hesitation. The weapons humanity had developed were beyond anything the galaxy had seen before. Planet crackers could literally destroy worlds. Nanite swarms would consume entire cities. Quantum bombs could tear holes in space itself. But then she thought of the images from New Boston. Children's hospitals vaporized, schools turned to glass, families murdered for the crime of wanting freedom. The Zerans had taught humanity that mercy was weakness. "All ships, this is Admiral Carter," she announced on the fleet-wide channel. "Today we end 1,000 years of Zeran tyranny. No quarter will be given. No surrender will be accepted. Every Zeran world will fall, and every species they've enslaved will be free." The human fleet moved out from Earth like an avenging angel, their destination the Zeran core worlds. But this wasn't a conventional military campaign. It was something the galaxy had never seen before. As the fleet traveled through space, other human forces struck simultaneously across the Empire. Captain Tony Blake led infiltration teams that destroyed Zeran infrastructure on 40 worlds in a single day. Dr. Karen Price's computer viruses turned entire fleets against each other, causing massive casualties without firing a shot. Most terrifyingly, humanity had weaponized psychology itself. Broadcasting systems throughout the Empire carried footage of human victories mixed with propaganda designed to break Zeran morale. The messages were simple. Your empire is falling, your leaders have abandoned you, and humanity is coming for revenge. The effect was devastating. Zeran colonies surrendered without a fight rather than face human attack. Military units deserted en masse, fleeing toward their home systems. Even on the homeworld itself, riots broke out as civilians panicked at the approaching human fleet. "Admiral," reported the sensor officer, "we're detecting massive ship movements throughout Zeran space. It looks like they're recalling all their fleets to defend the core worlds." Carter smiled coldly. "Let them come. We want them all in one place." High Commander Vexistar stood in the command center on Zeran Prime, watching the tactical displays, with growing despair. Every report brought worse news. Human forces weren't just advancing. They were systematically destroying everything the Empire had built. "Sir," his aide reported, "the humans have deployed some kind of weapon on Kepler 442b. The entire planet is dissolving." Vextar stared at the images in horror. The weapon appeared to be nanites that consumed matter at the molecular level, turning solid ground into gray dust that scattered in the wind. In 12 hours, a world that had housed 50 million beings was reduced to a dead rock. And Arcturus Station? Gone, sir. The humans used what they call a quantum bomb. The station simply ceased to exist. There's a hole in space where it used to be. Vextar had to grip his console to keep from falling. These weren't just weapons. They were instruments of cosmic destruction. The humans weren't just fighting a war. They were rewriting the laws of warfare itself. "How many ships do we have for the defense of the homeworld?" he asked. "Approximately 800 vessels, sir. The largest fleet ever assembled in Zeran. History. 800 ships, it should have been enough to stop any attacker. But Vexistar had learned not to underestimate human capabilities. The first wave of human attacks came from stealth ships that materialized inside the Zeran defensive perimeter. They launched swarms of devices that attached themselves to Zeran. Vessels then released nanites that began consuming the ships from the inside. The second wave was even worse. Human ships opened fire with weapons that ignored Zeran shields entirely, tearing through armor like paper. But these weren't just military targets. The humans were firing on civilian installations, government centers, and cultural sites. "They're targeting everything," Vextar's communications officer reported in shock. "Military bases, cities, farms, even museums and libraries." Vextar understood with cold clarity. The humans weren't trying to conquer the Zeran Empire. They were trying to erase it completely. Every aspect of Zeran civilization was being systematically destroyed. "Sir, incoming transmission from the human Admiral Carter." Carter's image appeared on the main screen, her expression as hard as stone. Behind her, Vextar could see displays showing the destruction of Zeran worlds. "High Commander, this is your final warning. Order all Zeran forces to surrender immediately, or we will crack your homeworld like an egg." "You can't be serious," Vextar said. "There are 3 billion civilians on this planet." "Were you thinking about civilians when you murdered 2 million people at New Boston?" Carter's voice was ice. "You taught us that there are no innocent civilians in war. We learned the lesson well." The transmission ended, leaving Vextar staring at a blank screen. Around him, his staff waited for orders that could save their civilization or doom it forever. He thought about the 1,000 years of Zeran expansion, the hundreds of species they had conquered, the countless worlds they had strip-mined and enslaved. Had any of their victims received mercy when they begged for it? "Sir," his aide prompted. Vextar looked at the tactical displays showing human ships surrounding their homeworld. Planet crackers were moving into position, weapons that could shatter a world in minutes. "Send the surrender order to all Zeran forces," he said quietly. "Sir?" "You heard me. Tell them to lay down their weapons and await human instructions." The surrender order went out across Zeran space, but it was too late to save many of their worlds. Human forces had been given specific targets and objectives, and they carried them out with ruthless efficiency. Colonel Matt Johnson landed on Zeran Prime with his Marines, moving through the capital city like an unstoppable force. The streets were empty except for scattered groups of Zeran civilians who watched in terror as human soldiers destroyed government buildings and military installations. But Johnson's real target was deeper in the city, the archive of conquered worlds, where the Zerans kept detailed records of every species they had enslaved. "Dr. Wells," he called into his communicator, "we've reached the archive. Beginning data extraction." Sophie Wells coordinated the massive download from her position aboard the Pioneer. The archive contained the locations of 847 enslaved worlds, the history of Zeran conquest, and most importantly, the names and locations of every Zeran leader responsible for centuries of oppression. "Colonel," she reported, "I found something incredible. The Zerans kept psychological profiles of every enslaved species. They studied their victims' culture specifically to find the most effective ways to break their spirits." Johnson felt his anger burn even hotter. The Zerans hadn't just conquered other species. They had tortured them scientifically, studying their pain to make enslavement more efficient. "Upload everything to the Liberation Fleet. Every enslaved world is going to know exactly what was done to them and who did it." The final phase of Operation Retribution wasn't military conquest. It was liberation on a scale the galaxy had never seen. Human ships arrived at enslaved worlds throughout the Empire, bringing the archived records that revealed the truth about Zeran oppression. The response was immediate and total. Species that had been enslaved for centuries rose up with the fury of people who finally understood the scope of their victimization. Zarin overseers were torn apart by mobs of former slaves. Collaboration governments collapsed as their people learned the truth about their protectors. But humanity didn't stop with simple liberation. They provided weapons, training, and support to ensure that the newly freed species could defend themselves. More importantly, they shared their own technology, the fruits of human creativity and scientific advancement. Admiral Carter stood on the observation deck of the Vengeance, watching the celebrations on a dozen different worlds as species tasted freedom for the first time in centuries. The sight should have filled her with satisfaction, but she felt only cold completion. "Admiral," Captain Foster approached with a report. "The Zarin homeworld has been secured. Colonel Johnson reports that High Commander Vextar knelt in the ruins of what had once been the grandest throne room in the galaxy. The crystal walls that had once showed the glory of the Zarin Empire now displayed images of liberated worlds, freed slaves, and the systematic dismantling of 1,000 years of conquest. Colonel Matt Johnson stood before him, holding a datapad that contained the names of every species the Zarins had enslaved, every world they had strip-mined, every civilization they had destroyed. "Do you know how many species your empire murdered completely?" Matt asked, his voice calm but filled with cold fury. Vextar remained silent. He had seen the reports. 43 species had been exterminated when they refused to submit. Hundreds more had been reduced to shadows of their former selves. 206, Matt continued. 206 entire civilizations wiped out because they wouldn't bow to Zarin superiority. And you want to know what the difference is between us and you? Vexitar looked up with his large black eyes. "We're going to make sure you live to see every single one of your victims free. Every world, every species, every individual your empire wronged will have justice. And you're going to watch it all." Over the following months, Vextar was transported from world to world throughout the former empire, forced to witness the trials and executions of Zarin officials. But more than that, he saw something the empire had never imagined. Their victims rebuilding, growing stronger, and creating new civilizations free from alien oppression. On Corvani Prime, the cat-like species that had been enslaved for 3 centuries now built great cities that reflected their own culture instead of Zarin architecture. Their art, suppressed for generations, flourished in ways that amazed even human observers. On Veltar 7, the crystalline beings who had been forced to mine their own homeworld now grew vast gardens that turned their planet into a jewel of beauty. Their natural harmony with their environment, disrupted by Zarin exploitation, was restored and enhanced. Each world showed the same pattern. Species that had been reduced to slave labor were revealing capabilities and creativity that the Zarins had never imagined possible. "You see," Matt told Vextar as they watched Yelani children playing in parks that had once been Zaron administrative centers, "you never understood what you were destroying. You thought conquest was about taking resources and labor. You never realized you were murdering entire universes of possibility." Admiral Lisa Carter stood before the Galactic Liberation Council, an assembly of representatives from 847 formerly enslaved worlds. The Great Hall had been built in the ruins of the Zarin High Command, a deliberate symbol of the new order. "Friends," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. 18 months ago, most of you lived under the boot of Zaran oppression. Today you are free beings deciding the fate of your former masters." The assembly listened intently. Representatives ranged from the towering Gorvani to the tiny crystalline shimmer folk. Some species were ancient, others had barely developed. Space travel before being conquered. but all shared the common experience of Xeran brutality. The question before us today is simple, Carter continued. What do we do with the surviving Xerans? A representative of the Veltar species stood, her crystalline form refracting light into beautiful patterns. Admiral Carter, my people were enslaved for 4 centuries. In that time, we lost our language, our culture, our very identity. Only now are we rediscovering who we were meant to be. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The Xerans showed no mercy to our children, no compassion for our elderly, no respect for our dead. Why should we show them what they never gave us? Carter nodded. That is certainly one perspective. But remember, we are not here to become them. We are here to ensure this never happens again. A Korvani representative spoke next, his feline features scarred from years of forced labor. With respect, Admiral, how do we know the surviving Xerans won't try to rebuild their empire? Their species has known only conquest for 1,000 years. An excellent question, Carter replied. Dr. Wells, would you share your research? Sophie Wells stepped forward, carrying a datapad filled with analysis. We've studied Xeran psychology extensively over the past year. Their entire social structure was built on the belief that they were naturally superior to other species. But that belief has been completely shattered. She activated a holographic display showing psychological profiles. The average Xeran citizen today suffers from what we can only call civilizational trauma. They've seen their greatest military commanders defeated by primitive humans, their supposedly invincible fleets destroyed by former slaves, their 1,000-year empire crumble in months. What does that mean practically? Asked a Shimmerfolk representative, her voice like tinkling bells. It means they're broken, Wells replied bluntly. Not just militarily, but psychologically. The idea of Xeran superiority was so central to their identity that its destruction has left them unable to function as a conquering civilization. Carter gestured to another display. Additionally, we've implemented what we call the Guardian Protocol. Every former Xeran world now has defensive installations staffed by liberated species. If any Xeran group tries to rebuild military forces, they'll face immediate intervention. The debate continued for hours, but eventually, a consensus emerged. The surviving Xerans would live, but as servants to the species they had once enslaved. They would work to rebuild the worlds they had damaged, restore the cultures they had suppressed, and pay reparations that would take generations to complete. More importantly, their children would be educated alongside the children of their former victims, learning the true history of their empire and the cost of believing in racial superiority. 2 years after the fall of the Xeran Empire, Captain Amy Foster, now promoted to Admiral, stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel New Horizon. Her mission was to make contact with species beyond the former Empire's borders, carrying a message from the Galactic Liberation Council. Admiral, reported her communications officer, we're receiving a response from the Centauri Federation. They're interested in establishing diplomatic relations. Amy smiled. Word of humanity's war against the Xerans had spread throughout the galaxy, carried by traders and explorers. Most civilizations were eager to establish peaceful relations with the species that had ended 1,000 years of tyranny. But there were others, species that had built their own empires through conquest and oppression. They watched the human-led coalition with fear and hostility, recognizing a threat to their own dominance. Any signs of military preparations in this sector? Amy asked her tactical officer. Negative, Admiral. The Centaurians appear to be a peaceful trading federation. No significant military installations. Amy nodded but remained alert. Humanity had learned that appearances could be deceiving, and that the galaxy contained threats they had never imagined. The bridge's main screen activated, showing a delegation of tall, slender beings with silver skin and large eyes. Their leader stepped forward and spoke in accented but clear English. "Admiral Foster, I am Ambassador Sheltar of the Centauri Federation. We have heard remarkable stories about your people and your defeat of the Zarin Empire. Ambassador, on behalf of the Human Liberation Fleet and the Galactic Liberation Council, I'm pleased to make contact with your Federation. We understand you offer protection to species threatened by aggressive neighbors. Is this true?" Amy's expression grew serious. "It is. Humanity and our allies have dedicated ourselves to ensuring that no species will again suffer the fate of Zarin victims. Any civilization that seeks to build an empire through conquest will find themselves facing our combined fleets. And what, do you ask, in return for this protection?" "Nothing," Amy replied simply. "We learned the hard way that a galaxy where the strong prey on the weak is a galaxy where no one is truly safe. We protect others, because protecting others protects ourselves." The Centaurian ambassador seemed surprised by this response. In his experience, all powerful species demanded tribute or servitude from those they protected. "We would be honored to join your alliance," he said finally. As the formal negotiations began, Amy thought about the long journey that had brought humanity to this point. They had started as victims, barely able to defend their own worlds. Now they commanded fleets that could travel between galaxies, weapons that could destroy planets, and alliances that spanned thousands of civilizations. But most importantly, they had learned the difference between strength and power. Power was the ability to force others to obey. Strength was the will to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The galaxy was vast, and there would always be new threats, new empires seeking to dominate their neighbors, new species that needed protection. But humanity and their allies were ready. On Earth, in a small ceremony attended by only a few hundred people, Colonel Matt Johnson stood before a simple memorial wall. Carved into the black stone were the names of every human who had died at New Boston, including his wife Sarah and daughter Emma. President Helen Davis, now in her second term, stood beside him. "They would be proud of what you've accomplished," she said quietly. Matt touched Sarah's name with his fingertips. "I hope so. Sometimes I wonder if we went too far, if we became too much like our enemies. Did we show mercy to innocents? Yes. Did we protect the weak from the strong?